Greetings, RAISE community. Brent coming in live with Derek Dictson, who is the Vice President for Advancement and the President at the New Mexico State University Foundation. Welcome, Derek.
Thanks, Brent. It's glad to be with you today.
Absolutely. So where are you in the world today?
I am in beautiful Las Cruces, New Mexico. We're near El Paso, Texas.
Love it. We are going to make sure to jump into your current role and your career path over time, which is more circuitous than many in this sector. And so I'm super excited to just learn a little bit about what led you down this path. But I have really enjoyed getting to understand the educational path of our guests. And you've heard a bunch of episodes. You've probably heard this question, but I want to go back in time to junior year of high school. Who was that, Derek, and what inspired you to go to New Mexico State University?
Wow, we're going in the way back machine now. So I grew up in eastern New Mexico. I was born in Lubbock, Texas, and grew up just across the state line in eastern New Mexico. So I went to a really small high school called Texaco High School. We had a graduating class of about 28 people. So it was select. I'll call it.
And that was in New Mexico or in Texas?
Yep. It was in New Mexico, right on we had a railroad track and one stoplight that separated us from Farwell, Texas.
So the number one question I get, having gone to a high school with roughly 60 graduates in Iowa, is, did they have 8-man football? So I don't typically ask that question to anyone else, but what was the deal there?
That is a really good question. No, we had a full football team. We actually won the state championship my freshman year. And because the school was so small, if you played one sport, you had to play them all. So I also played basketball and ran track, and I wasn't very good at any of them, but they needed the bodies.
As a small school kid, I can empathize with that. And congrats on the state championship. Never quite got there. So you're in eastern New Mexico, thinking about college. Was it a no-brainer to go to New Mexico State? Was there other options as you were thinking through things?
I think I probably did send my application to a few places. I remember just on a whim, sending it to Harvard and Texas A&M and, just a few schools I'd heard of, growing up in eastern New Mexico. I didn't really know a whole lot outside the area. I'd traveled a little bit at that point, but not much. At this point, I've been to almost 50 different countries. And so it feels like a lot's passed, a lot of water under the bridge since then. But at that point, my dad and my granddad had both worked for New Mexico State University for a combined about 90 years or so. And so this was home for us. I spent a lot of time in the summers doing activities. I was in 4-H and FFA, and we would do stuff on the New Mexico State University campus and felt very much at home here. And then the decision maker, though, I ended up becoming an economist when I went through school. So I guess I was meant to be from high school, was the New Mexico Lottery Scholarship. And it actually paid most of our costs of attending college. And then I got an academic scholarship that paid the rest of it. So got out of school debt free. And that was pretty important to a small town kid with no money.
I love it. And it's not, it's frankly common for our guests to have some early exposure to philanthropy. And you probably didn't use that word or really understand how it all worked, but or maybe you did. I mean, what was your experience as a scholarship recipient? Did you understand what that meant? Did you feel connected to the support?
I absolutely did. I was fortunate enough to be selected for the President's Associate Scholarship at New Mexico State, which is it's kind of the highest level scholarship that our foundation provides. It's still going today. And we had a lot of opportunity to meet our donors. And so we would do events at donors' homes and they would meet with us throughout the year. And so it was pretty evident to me early on that, multiple people had invested in my education. So that I didn't really, think it was going to be a career at that point, but I think I was familiar. Yeah.
And so while you're at New Mexico State, you're pursuing the economics focus, but quickly decided to pursue a master's degree. Was that something that you stumbled upon along the way, or what was the catalyst to explore sort of continuing ed right out of your degree program?
Yeah, my wife and I both wanted to get our masters, and we thought, if we could get into a program that we were interested in, it might be easier just to go and do that rather than going out and working and trying to come back to school. And so we were both accepted to some programs, different places, but Texas A&M was the only place that we could both be in the same school at the same time. And so we went from New Mexico State to Texas A&M. We didn't even have to change our colors or our mascot. They're both the Aggies, both maroon, and so we just went down the road a little ways and did our masters, and it was great. It allowed us to get that chapter of our lives over with before we went out and started working for a living.
Well, same colors, same mascot, but very different places. How would you describe the New Mexico State undergrad experience in a sentence, and how would you describe A&M in a sentence?
Yeah, so New Mexico State is definitely a much smaller school. Felt like home, felt like family. I had my family right down the road, so I had a great support network. My wife grew up just right, maybe an hour from Las Cruces, and so she had her family here, and it was great. It was a good transition into our adult lives. We also, my wife and I, have had family businesses our entire lives. So we started a business together before we even got married. We were DJing dances and mowing lawns in Las Cruces to help pay for school. And
At
so
the
it
same
was
time? Were you
at
doing
the
those
same
things?
time. Yeah.
Yeah, DJing dances and mowing lawns. That is a unique combo. I got to know, any like favorite memory from lawn mowing and then favorite memory from DJing a dance in that order.
Yeah, my favorite memory from mowing lawns was you got to get a master's degree and get a good job because I don't want to be doing this my whole life. My favorite memory from DJing dances was getting to play the weddings for our friends that we went to school with that were getting married. It was pretty cool to get to do that. And so there were several of those.
Which of your friends had the best wedding party? It's okay, you can share.
Not even going to go there. There was a lot of them. Yeah, A&M was just a massive, big school. It was, for the two kids from New Mexico, it was a shining city on a hill. It was wonderful. It was a great experience. We ended up living there for about 18 years and raising our kids there for most of their childhood. And it was a great place to live. Being at two land grant universities, they were very similar as far as their history, their mission. The alumni base was very similar. And so we felt like we were at home there also.
And you graduated from the master's program in 2000 at the peak of the .com boom. What was that time like, and what was your path out of A&M?
It was awesome, Brent. I got to tell you a quick story. A buddy and I we did a kind of a directed studies class our last year in school, and we were studying internet-based voting. This was before the Bush-Gore election and the hanging chads and all that kind of stuff. And so we both wanted to go into high tech. We wanted to go into a startup just like everybody did at that time. And so we thought, well, we're getting our degrees in public administration. What can we do, that would combine public administration with something in high tech that might be able to make a difference? And we thought, well, voting. Everybody's using these stupid punch cards. And so we wrote a paper and ended up presenting to the Democratic National Committee, and the paper was published in Portuguese in Brazil, and it made quite a splash. So we both ended up going to work in that industry. I went up to Seattle and joined a small startup. My buddy went to work for what eventually became Accenture Consulting, doing the same area. But we did a trip together to the Bay Area, and this would have been the summer of 1999. So between our 2 years of our program. And I remember we were out there interviewing for jobs, and we had some good interviews. We were going to be the next tech moguls, right? So I remember going into this converted shopping center, and we walked into this place, and my buddy had a friend from high school that worked there. She was, I think, the 16th hire or something like that. And we walked in, we thought, this is pretty cool. Everybody's got these cots around, they're sleeping under their desk. The deli section over in the corner has a chef cooking meals for them. And so we met and we did our thing. And I remember walking out the door and we looked at each other. We're like, that was pretty cool, but this place will never make it. It's a search engine. I mean, how's a search engine going to make any money? It was Google, and they had maybe 120 employees at that time. So I don't have the best decision making in the world, but that's what led me here.
It's incredible. I mean, to think about having a window into something, in a firsthand capacity. But look, there were a lot of really smart people who agreed exactly with your assessment, and that's part of what makes this also so exciting. But ultimately, it was the tech path that you pursued, and timing matters, and it was an interesting time.
Yeah, it sure was. Yeah, our company grew really rapidly for a couple of years, and then and then didn't. When the tech bubble burst and 9/11 happened, Seattle was airplanes and computers, and neither one of those were going very well. And I remember we called up a former professor here at New Mexico State, or I called him up and I said, Dr. Gorman, I worked for this guy while I was a student in ag economics, and I said, Dr. Gorman, I'm probably going to need a job. Do you have any idea of something that I could do? And he was executive director of a nonprofit organization that I'd been a member of as a student. We actually, I think my senior year in college, went to Indonesia together. It was my first trip outside the country. And he said, yeah, this organization that you were a part of was called the International Food and Agribusiness Management Association. It's a mouthful. They're looking for an executive director. He was kind of in a board role. And he said, they're looking for a full-time executive director. Would you be interested? And it was based at Texas A&M. I'd been familiar with this organization. I was like, sure, I don't have anything else to do. I don't know much about running a nonprofit, but I'll try it. And he said, well, there's one catch. Their balance sheet, they're insolvent. Their balance sheet has a negative $50,000 balance. And like, well, okay, that's a challenge. And so I took that job and stayed there for about 6 years and traveled the world. And it was a fascinating job, and I fell in love.
Coming out of the tech boom, a negative $50,000 balance wasn't so bad, really.
Didn't seem that bad.
Yeah. So you're pretty young at this point, right out of, a couple years out of your master's program. That's a big role to step into. And, in an executive director capacity, typically you're marketing, your sales, your donor engagement, you're getting the payroll out. I mean, there's a lot of things you probably hadn't done before that you had to figure out in that role.
No, that's right. And it was a one-person shop, so I had to do it all, and thankfully, through some of these little family businesses that my wife and I had continued, through the years, we kind of knew how to run a simple payroll and how to advertise and that sort of thing. And I knew a lot of these people. I'd attended their conferences before, and so they were familiar. They were just happy to have somebody there to do the work, and it was great. It was a good opportunity to get involved in management of a nonprofit. I got to wear all the hats. So I was the accountant, I was the bookkeeper. I was doing sales and marketing and raising sponsorship money and planning events and the whole 9 yards. So I got exposed to a lot of things really early, and I've used bits and pieces of those throughout the rest of my career. And I can't think of a better start, completely accidentally, for somebody that wanted to be in this industry.
And you have, especially at that point in your career, you were in the College Station area. You worked for a few different nonprofits. You got hooked in the space. But also in doing that, I'm sure when you're serving in those roles in a, somewhat smaller community, you must kind of get to know everybody who would be in a donor capacity. And you probably ran into some of the same donors at different nonprofits. I'm curious to know a little bit about the, competitive dynamic, if you will, because oftentimes we talk in higher ed advancement. Well, we're all friends. We're not really competing with one another, but in a certain regard, local nonprofits are, even if that isn't what they come to work every day thinking about.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's very perceptive. I ran a nonprofit health clinic for a number of years. When I left the International Food and Agribusiness Management Association, I took over as executive director of a relatively small nonprofit health clinic. We were taking care of chronic uninsured chronic disease patients. Lots of times they'd end up in the emergency room, and the emergency room would refer them to us as kind of their stable source of primary care, since they had no other options. and we'd try to keep them stabilized and out of the hospital is basically our mission. And so it was a fantastic place. I spent a few years there. I also ran the community foundation in our community for a number of years, and it was really small when I took over. I think we had just under $1 million of assets under management, and so that was related, but it was more estate planning and major gifts and that sort of thing. The health clinic was more, galas and cards at Christmas time and very much retail fundraising. We were a United Way organization, and so I got exposed to a lot of different grant writing. We did a ton of grant writing too. So I got exposed to just about every way that you could possibly raise money in a community nonprofit. And it wasn't very competitive. We had United Way conferences where all of the different nonprofits in town that were supported by United Way would get together on a monthly basis, and we got to know each other. We talked about best practices. It felt a lot like this business now, when I can call up my friends at Kansas State or at A&M and Auburn, and everybody shares ideas with each other. It felt very much the same. And I think the community members in a community like that, they're pretty clear about, what they care about and what they're going to support. And if you're not in that group, then that's fine, but they'll tell their friends about you.
Tell me a little bit about Health for All, because when I think about the mission there of providing primary health care to low-income uninsured patients, it's almost like, in a certain regard, the opposite of higher education, where higher education, very broad, you've got an existing constituency with alumni, friends, athletics fans, and so forth. This is one community, one very specific cause, but it also means that your constituency could theoretically be anyone, anywhere, realistically, or at least anyone in the area who, because who doesn't sort of, when you say that sentence, it's hard to say, no, that's not something I would care about. But at the same time, where do you focus in building a constituency for something that is so specific?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I'd been exposed to that nonprofit organization as a student when I was, didn't have health insurance. And I remember, needing a doctor at one point, or Nikki did, one or the other, and we called up Health for All. We found like, well, you can go here and get some, a free consultation, and I did. And it was New Mexico State. I'm sorry, it was Texas A&M nursing students, and eventually pharmacy students and students that were in the medical residency program that largely staffed it. And for a lot of them, it was their first experience with real life patients. They got to put to practice in a clinical setting what they were learning in their classroom. And so it was a fantastic partnership with the university. But to build, I started out, thinking of it as a business, like I have at all the nonprofits I've been at. I said, well, who's this benefiting? And we put together basically a business proposal for the local hospitals, showing them how much money we saved them. And we were able to take our patient records and compare it to their patient records and say, this person, before they came to Health for All, had ended up in your emergency room 6 times in the last 3 months. They can put a number to that, right? After they started coming to Health for All, they didn't go back to your emergency, or they went to your emergency room 1 time in the next 6 months, and so it was very easy for these hospitals to realize the value of our organization. So the majority of the money came from there. We also wrote a grant to the Walmart Foundation and asked them for a large amount of money, because our customers shopped at Walmart. And if they were healthy and they were able to hold a stable job and earn money, they're going to spend more money at Walmart. So I approached it from a business standpoint, and I went out and made business deals with major local foundations and businesses that could see a reason from a profit and loss standpoint to support our organization. And then we did all the retail stuff. We came up with really fun fundraising events, and we did really creative direct mail stuff. And that's kind of how we went about our business. I hired students from Texas A&M to write grants for me, and they'd come in the summer, and I think we'd crank out 70 or 80 grants. Request to foundations over the summer. So we were scrappy.
So during this entire period, your connection to A&M remained strong, given that you're both in the community and I'm sure constantly interfacing with different members of the community who work on campus. but ultimately going and stepping up to do development at A&M as part of a large organization that's incredibly successful and mature is sort of the opposite of super scrappy, executive director kind of having to do it all. So was that a tough decision? Was it just a stage of life thing? I mean, what do you reflect on as you made that choice and during that experience?
Oh man, it was not a hard decision at the time. Let me back up just a second. I was running the community foundation first. When I left the university, the nonprofit, I went and I took over as president of the local community foundation. I took that job about 2 months before Lehman Brothers failed. And that set off the whole, meltdown in 2008, 2009. My wife and I, at that point, brilliant timing, once again, we're in the middle of a real estate development with some friends. And so we, it's a bad time to be in the housing business with the housing boom crashing down. And so we were doing that on the side. I was running the community foundation, and we went into what we called sustainability mode, which meant I went 25% with the community foundation, trying to keep the wheels on, but help it survive, because we didn't know how long this thing was going to last. And one of my board members was also a board member at Health for All. So she got me the job there. So I was running both of these nonprofits at the same time for about 3 years. And so reporting to two different boards, trying to cut, we also had a business cutting trees. So we started this tree removal business, and I was hiring firefighters and EMTs to cut trees. So in the evening after work, I'd go out and do sales and, for the tree business. So when I got the call from A&M, it was like a lifeline. I'd been burning the candle at both ends and in the middle, for several years, just trying to keep my family fed and keep the wheels on these two nonprofits. And so when I got the call from A&M, I was like, you mean I can come and just raise money? I can come and just work in the College of Engineering and travel and meet donors and raise money, and I don't have to report to boards, and I don't have to do bookkeeping, and I can, and so, yeah, it was the best decision I ever made. And I didn't know at the time that it would turn out to be a career. And it hasn't been that long ago. This was probably in, 2009 or so, I believe. No, it was in 2012. It wasn't that long ago that I entered higher education fundraising. But having all those experiences from the past, I think, really kind of opened up the world, and it gave me an opportunity to go from just being a fundraiser to having some management opportunities, and now do this.
Well, I'm not sure when to talk about this. Maybe now is the time. You've already hinted at it, but ultimately, exec director roles, two of them at the same time, and you've got multiple side hustles before they called them side hustles. You weren't afraid to take on a challenge, that's for sure. But when you think about, I am curious a little bit, just to, as it relates to some of the entrepreneurial endeavors you've done on the side with your wife or friends and others. How do you think about that as being maybe a helpful part of your skill set as you've settled into development leadership roles?
Well, I think it helped a lot understanding how business works, how private business works, and this, when you have people relying on you for their income and to feed their family and pay for their mortgage and all that kind of stuff, it's a different level of responsibility. And so I think in every role that I've taken on, when I have people that rely on me in that way, I want to make sure that the business works and that the business part of the nonprofit is sustainable. I've always kind of used the saying, no money, no mission. If we don't, if we can't pay the bills, if we're not profitable as a nonprofit, we're not sustainable over the long run, and we certainly can't. We certainly can't scale and grow the way that most organizations want to do over time. And so I've approached every one of these roles from very much a business standpoint. I want to understand the financials. I want to know how the accounting systems work. I want to make sure that our P&L statement is healthy and cut expenses if we need to. Want to make sure that our balance sheet looks good. And so I kind of approach it as a business, from a business standpoint. And then the fundraising stuff is just what's fun, getting to travel and meet with donors and ask for gifts and match up, passions with needs. And that's the gravy on top.
You've done fundraising in the nonprofit context, but when you think about some of the donor relationships that you built at A&M, or maybe some of the gifts that you were involved with where you really got to see it from initiation through close, do any specific gifts stand out as being just moments you really value?
Yeah, I mean, one that I always think back on, it was awesome because it was my very first gift, fundraising in the higher ed space. And I was walking down the hall one day. I was assigned to the College of Engineering, and our shop was divided out by departments. So I was given responsibility for a couple of departments. And I think that day I was in the nuclear engineering department, and I had an office there. And I was walking down the hall, and one of the staff members stepped out and said, "Hey," and she said, "Aren't you the new development guy?" I'm like, "Yeah." This was maybe my first week. And she said, "I want to start a scholarship. Can you help me with that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I can. I may have to ask some questions of some of my colleagues, but I think I can." And this lady had been a student counselor, advisor for students for her career. And so she had helped select scholarship awardees, and she had helped counsel these students to keep their GPA up, to keep their scholarship, all this kind of stuff. So she knew exactly what she wanted to do, but she wanted her own scholarship, and that was just a dream of hers. She had had finally put together the money to be able to fund it, and it was a $25,000 endowed scholarship. It's one of those that you do on a weekly basis anymore, but boy, it was impactful for me, and I know it made it probably still to this day. She loves that scholarship, I'm sure.
Well, I doubt all the gifts come in that easy, where they chase you down and say, "Hey, where can I send the money?"
Not very often.
Love it. So you went from maybe looking at this as just a bit of a reprieve during such a tumultuous time in the broader economy, everything you're navigating in the sort of resource constrained nonprofit realm, to really hitting your stride at A&M. But then ultimately, after what had been a really long time in the area, you made the move to Auburn in a leadership role, which could not have been easy for you and your family, given all the ties that you built in town.
Yeah, probably not. Our kids were at the age where we decided we're either going to do this or we're going to stay here, for a while. I think my daughter was just going into junior high. My son was still in elementary school, and we really didn't want to, move them in the middle of high school, which is interesting given what's happened over the last couple of years. But we had best intentions at heart. So Auburn was a great opportunity for me to step up into a pretty big time management role. I got to work for the best fundraising dean I've ever met in my life. I got to work with Jane Parker, who I'm pretty sure you know from Auburn. I have a really good team there. The engineering team that I got to manage is amazing. It's the best group of they're awesome, and best group of fundraisers that I've ever worked with. And they taught me a lot. It was a great opportunity. We raised a lot of money. We had a lot of fun. I met a lot of really great people up there, and it was definitely hard. It was as hard to leave Auburn as it was to leave A&M. For the kids, it was fine. They learned some resilience. I think we funded a scholarship at Auburn, and we met our scholarship student at a banquet one night, and my daughter was sitting next to her. And this student, I think she'd moved to Auburn from Dallas. And so she was on our scholarship, and she turns to my daughter and says, "You're really lucky." And my daughter is still in this sulking mood about having to leave all her friends and start over. And she's like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, you've already done it. You've proven to yourself that you can move and you can start over. College is going to be so easy for you, And she talked about how it wasn't that way for her. And it was one of those moments that I was like, all right, maybe this will turn out okay,
Yeah, I mean, it's really neat to see the impact of your gift, but also working in that capacity and being able to share a window, into that world for your daughter. I mean, that's huge. And when you think about Auburn, obviously an incredibly passionate community. It's just amazing to get exposure to that world, just, like A&M in a different capacity. But any like peak moments when you think about the time at Auburn?
Oh gosh, so many peak moments. I loved every meeting I ever had with my dean. It was, we worked really well together, and we started a group.
Tell me more about that relationship, because it can be the catalyst for success, and it can derail careers if you don't get it right. And so even in taking the job, did you feel that level of connectivity? I mean, what advice would you have to other fundraisers who, I don't know, maybe are going to have to partner with the dean, but aren't sure of what that dynamic will be like?
Yeah, no, I would, after that experience, I would never take another job without making sure that that my academic partner was that same type of committed. No, I was in an airport interview in the Atlanta airport, and had gone through the gauntlet of meeting 15 different people and whole day of interviews, and then I sat down with the dean, and we hit it off right off the bat. He explained his vision for the future of the college. He did it in a way that I got excited about it, and I was like, this guy, you set him down in front of donors, he's a rock star. And he talked about the relationship he wanted to have with his chief development officer, and the types of things that he wanted to accomplish with me. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be great. And then as we worked together, it was like just, we would bounce ideas off each other. We would talk about pros and cons of different approaches. We would talk a lot of high level strategy. One of the things he wanted to do, Auburn engineering is really, really good. They're a lot better than they get credit for in the rankings. So they wanted to be a top 20 engineering school. And with everything that you can imagine that goes into that, to pass really good schools, we were in the mid 30s. So to climb 15 spots at the top of the list when there's 450 engineering programs in this country is hard to do. And so we talked a lot about what that was going to take, and we ended up working together to set up a group we called the Strategic Leadership Team. Started out as being 12 couples of our principal gift donors for the college, and we brought them together. The donor that had named the college, his name was Samuel Ginn, a guy out of California. We asked him if he would host this group, and when Sam Ginn called, people would answer the phone. And Tim Cook was one of our grads at Apple. We had some pretty influential folks.
I was going to ask if you got to tell Tim Cook your Google story or not.
I don't think I shared that one with him, but I did have to borrow an Apple Watch from a friend when I went out to visit him the first time. So now I've got my own. So yeah, but we put this strategic leadership team together, and this group of 12 people over the time that I was there gave almost $100 million to seed what was kind of an interim campaign to raise some money to try to become a top 20 engineering program. And that was just a heck of a lot of fun. We got to basically plan our own little campaign. We were outside of Auburn's comprehensive campaign. It had ended at that point, and we're given a lot of latitude to be creative and go out and do some really, really cool stuff. And some of those donors, they'll be friends for life.
That's super neat, and I'm sure it's a chance to reconnect with your tech roots, as you were saying.
Yeah.
So you left Auburn at such an interesting time, and I don't know if you had whispers or inklings of what the pandemic might look like, but there are a lot of folks that dealt with transitions and in leaders that transitioned during the time, but few timed it like you did. And so just tell me a little bit about early 2020 for you and your family, and just kind of how things unfolded.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. I'd been interviewing for a little while. I got a call from a school that was really interesting to me from a kind of a personal historical standpoint back in October of 2019. And so I kind of started interviewing. I let my dean and Jane and some others know that I was going through this process. I'd been offered the opportunity to interview for a position that would be really hard for me to turn down. They were great mentors and friends at that time. And so I was going through that process, and in in December, January, 2019, January 2020, these two things kind of dovetailed. The New Mexico State University position came up right at the end of this process. So I was thinking I was going to Boston, right? And our family had done a family trip up there. We were prepared to make this move to the Northeast, and all of a sudden this thing comes up, and it was a whirlwind right at the end. And so over the holidays, 2019, 2020, we were visiting New Mexico and Boston, trying to figure out which direction to go. Got both offers in the same week. And so we had to make this really hard decision. But I ended up accepting this NMSU job, January of 2020. So no, we had no idea. I think maybe, COVID was showing up in some stuff, but everybody thought it was, going to stay in China or whatever. My daughter and I went on a trip to Africa together in February, and on our way back, I remember there were thermal scanners in the airport where they were, scanning the whole crowd and seeing if anybody popped up looking like they had a fever. But it still wasn't really real. We didn't think this was going to impact things. But my first day here at NMSU was April 1st. So it was in full swing. We'd already made the decision as a university to go remote. And so I came here fully remote in April of 2020. Didn't meet any of my staff in person for a long time. So it was onboarding and managing via Zoom. Thank God Zoom existed, right? I mean, that was the technology that existed at the time, at least made it possible. And I'm still we're back in person now, but I'm still meeting people for the first time in person. It was quite a ride.
Derek, I want to dive into your reflections and lessons learned over the last year, but you did mention that you were in Africa right prior to the pandemic, and I know you've done some really important work there. You also mentioned that you've now gone from very humble beginnings to traveling to over 50 countries, and so I'd love to just talk a little bit about the global perspective that you've developed.
Yeah, so travel's always kind of been a passion of mine. And when I was with the tech company up in Seattle, we were doing voting technology. It was the first generation of the software that now runs the computerized election systems that most of us vote on. So this was really early. And one of our board members was director of elections for Washington State, and another board member was Secretary of State for Washington State. So these guys ran the elections up there in Washington. And the one that was director of elections, he said, I'm a election supervisor and election monitor for the U.S. State Department. They send us to countries around the world, mostly former Soviet countries, and we go over and help them with their elections. And he said, you might want to sign up for that. It'd give you a good perspective on how this business is done in the rest of the world. So I signed up, and I've been doing that now for about 20 years, gone all over the world, most of the stands, and a lot of the Kosovo, Belarus, a lot of the former Soviet countries is where I travel to. But I go over and do election monitoring and supervision for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and we're State Department seconded employees while we're over there. And it's just a fascinating experience, a great way to travel the world, and so I kind of had a passion for that. We were in College Station. Yeah. I
was going to say, any crazy experiences that you can share from those journeys, or just smooth sailing through all the stands?
Yeah. So I was in Kosovo for their first election as an independent country. That was interesting. I had to travel with the German military unit. We had to get trained on landmine safety, and I remember it was a local election, so mayors and councils and that sort of thing. And there was a lot of assassinations going on. It was basically, the last person left alive is gonna, run the place. So it was a little hairy. It was still, more or less kind of a war zone over there at the time. And so, that one was interesting. I was in Ukraine for the Orange Revolution, which it felt like a pivotal moment in history. So some of those things will stick with me for a long time. And I've met, when you're doing this, they partner you up with another election monitor from a different country, and you spend about 10 days together. You also have a driver and interpreter that are locals, and a lot of those folks that were my partners will be, again, friends for life. It's it's quite an experience.
Wow, thank you for sharing. I didn't have any appreciation for all of that work, and it's interesting because technology and the impact on society stands out as being something you were interested in early on, and I know you still share that interest. And I know you mentioned already, but you've basically been one of the leaders who's had to start and build your relationships from Zoom for the most part. And obviously that's evolved here over the last few months. But what was that like? And, what were the highlights and the challenges of maybe those first 6 months or so?
Well, it wasn't too bad, actually. I was amazed how adaptable the staff was. And I think we saw this everywhere. Even before I left Auburn, they were starting to kind of shut down. I remember over spring break of 2020, we went on a cruise. When we left, they were still saying, well, we're not going to give you a refund. It's a personal decision. And by the time we got back, like we were probably the last ship to get to unload people, when we got. So it was that week that the world changed. And I remember coming back from spring break, and Auburn never did go back to school. It was remote. And I was in a college of engineering. It's hard to teach engineering remote. It's a very hands-on, lab-based curriculum. And they basically, over a couple of week period, literally redefined how they teach engineering to kids, and they did it very successfully. And I remember thinking at the time, we have just leaped 15, 20 years into the future overnight. Everything is different, and it'll never be the same again. And I know when I got to NMSU, they had sent everybody home. We didn't even have laptops for everybody. Most people were on obsolete desktop computers, right? And so one of the first things we did was invested in about 30 laptops, and and invested in some webcams and other technology. We hadn't converted to the cloud, so we started that process. We just started investing in a lot of time and energy into this remote thing because we didn't know how long it was going to last. But everybody dived in, and everybody was productive. We just kind of started out doing staff meetings on Zoom, and I don't think it took that long before it kind of felt normal.
Yeah, it's I think the resiliency and adaptability, we all experience that. And yeah, it's amazing when you're forced, right? If you're not forced to change, you don't. When you're forced to change, it's amazing how much change can occur. And at the same time, you had a comment in your questionnaire that I'd love to talk about because it hasn't come up very often. You said, I think augmented reality will rock our world and change the industry forever. I totally agree, but I also feel like augmented reality missed its moment because it's been worked on and talked about for so long. But the Zoom experience you and I are having right now is not that different than the Zoom experience we could have had 7 years ago if we'd wanted to.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, we've been talking about it for a long time. I remember as a 4-H kid in middle school or, early high school, I did a speech on virtual reality. And this kid named Jaron Lanier, who was a student at New Mexico State University, ended up being a pioneer in virtual reality. And I wrote gave a speech in a competition on this thing. And here we are, all these years later, and it hadn't come along that well. But you look at the work that Facebook and others are starting to kind of publish with augmented reality. It reminds me of the early, I'm not sure how old you are, but I grew up when we had the Atari, right, and the first Nintendo and Tecmo Bowl, all that kind of stuff. It feels like we're at that point of the development of augmented and virtual reality, and I truly do believe that before too long, you and I could feel like we're having this talk across the desk from each other, rather than looking at each other on a little 3-inch screen on our monitor here.
I couldn't agree more. And you're making me think back. I'm pretty sure that roughly 30 years ago, Nintendo actually had some sort of headset where it was sort of like the first Oculus or something. And, here we are, and we're still kind of waiting. It's like that and the hoverboard, but I think we're getting closer on virtual reality and some of the augmented reality, obviously, as well. But I do also think, even in the context of remote work and do visits need to be in person? And some of these conversations that have been playing out on social media that I've been a part of, we're viewing it as pretty binary at this point. And I do think that the virtual reality components have an opportunity to make it far less black and white than maybe it feels today.
Absolutely. I think it's going to change our world, especially in stewardship. One of my favorite things from this last year, I had moved to New Mexico, but we still have a scholarship at Auburn, and they invited us to their virtual scholarship reception. And it was awesome. They had to plan 2 separate ones because they had so many people. When we expect people for stewardship reasons to travel to our campus, or we have to plan a trip to travel to them,
that's a big ask. That's a big ask. And the ability, right? The reality is every scholarship recipient that you have supported in the past, that you will support in the future, is now a Zoom link away.
Yeah.
And the friction in getting you together and the cost of planning that event and having people come and then effectively limiting it to people that could drive. Because not a lot of people are going to fly in for that sort of thing. I mean, what a game changer that is.
Oh, I think so. I think we've still got to crack the nut maybe on discovery visits and that sort of thing. I mean, by the time I spend all day on Zoom, the last thing I want to do is talk to some fundraiser on Zoom, and so I think that has been harder. Maybe it was nice to have the technology available, but I'm not sure that it was, if we could have the same experience of shaking hands and sitting down and having a conversation like you do in someone's office or home or over lunch, if we could have that experience, and that there's something that goes on up here when you're with someone that doesn't happen over Zoom. And as soon as that can be cracked, and it just becomes normal that this is a normal way that people interact, and it's not an exhausting, another exhausting Zoom call, I think at that point things are really going to change. And it may be this this VR type of stuff that does it. I don't know that it's going to do it with the the Facebook avatars, cartoony avatars with no legs. But at some point, this will graduate from Atari to the Xbox, and it'll be exciting.
I think that's well said. And while there are definitely constraints to Zoom, we've also heard countless stories like you shared around stewardship, or the ability to include a dean or the president or someone in the conversation who realistically never could have traveled, or we couldn't have gotten schedules to align. Have you experienced that in your role, or what have you done?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I'll take credit for this whole Zoom thing that's happened, by the way. I'm pretty sure we invented it at Auburn Engineering. We had an event up in DC one time with a group of people, and our dean at the last minute couldn't catch the flight. I don't remember what happened, but he called and he was like, I can't be there. And we were already in DC. We were at I think the Raytheon headquarters in a ballroom, and we were set up, and the dean wasn't going to make it. And we were like, what are we going to do? Are we going to cancel? We got like 30 people coming. And so we decided, what we're going to do? We're going to use technology. The university just signed some contract with this company called Zoom. We've never used it, but we'll try it, And we created this thing. We called it Dean in a Box. And we did this at Exxon. We did it all over the country, where we would have our dean zoom in. We'd put him up on the screen, and we would point the camera monitor out to the audience, and they could listen to the engineering dean talking to him over this cool technology. And then they could come up afterward and sit at the computer and have a private chat with him, just like this. And we just called it Dean in a Box. And we did it all over the country. And it was awesome because he didn't have to leave his job, fly across the country to go do these development meetings. And people loved it because it was different, right? It wouldn't be different today, but it was different in 2018, 2019 when we were doing that.
I love it. And, kudos for giving it a shot early, because that's the kind of idea that oftentimes can get shot down. And, it was done out of necessity.
We had to. Yeah, we had, it was necessity, right? So, it's amazing what you can do when you don't have any other choice.
And so as you think about where you are today at New Mexico State, I know you all are in a unique position where you're hiring like crazy. That's not that common right now. So why is it that at this moment, New Mexico State is in that privileged position?
Well, when I got here, we had a number of positions open. So we've been filling those. I think I've hired 11 or 12 people since I got here. Maybe only 2 or 3 of them have I actually been able to met before we, kind of virtually shook hands over Zoom. It's been remote hiring. We've even hired a couple of people that didn't live here, that lived in Albuquerque or other places. And so going forward, we have a staffing plan and a budget model that's going to allow us to grow. We renegotiated our operating agreement with the university, changed our entire funding model, made some commitments to them from the fundraising side, and so it's allowing us to grow. Our budget went up quite a bit this year, and we were able to fund a lot of positions that we didn't have in the past. We're building out an entire advancement marketing communications team that didn't exist. Really growing our major gift fundraising team. We had a lot of assets on the operations side that we've been able, through technology and other changes, we've been able to really get a lot more efficient and lean on that side, so we can reinvest those resources on the either external relations or the development side. And so we've just ended up with, I think we've got 16 positions open right now that we need to hire as soon as we possibly can. And it's going to be exciting. It's about a third of our workforce. And so we're going to be able to, kind of implement this cultural change that we've been planning for over the past year, pretty quickly.
Very exciting, Derek. And we'll make sure to share those postings with our community for sure. Awesome. Tell me a little bit about just relationships you've built in the sector, mentors or peers who you think highly of. That's one of the beauties of the space, is how tight knit it is. And who are some of the people that you've really come to respect? Yeah. I started building that circle when I was in engineering back at A&M. We would go to the Engineering Development Forum. It's it's international, really. We've got a number of schools from Canada that come. An international conference of engineering schools and their development teams. And so I would go to that. When I got to Auburn, I'd take, my whole staff if we could. I took my dean. We presented jointly one time. We were going to host at Auburn. We were supposed to host in June of 2020, and of course that got canceled. But I served on their board, and so through that, I've managed to build a circle of folks that are in leadership roles all over the country. Some of them still in engineering. Some of them have gone on to other roles. And I'll call anybody who'll answer the phone. Greg Willems at KSU, Kansas State's been a great mentor for me. I followed him into engineering at A&M. So a lot of the donors that I had, I was able to experience success because Greg had taken such good care of them when he was there. And he went off and has served in a few VP foundation president roles and is at Kansas State now. And so I've called Greg up a lot and I said, hey, man, I need to bounce something off of you, or need to learn, what would you do in this situation? And I called up my old foundation president at A&M, Dr. Ed Davis. He's retired at this point, but I actually hired him onto a consulting contract to help me with this negotiation for the new memo of understanding with the university. And I knew that he had served on the board with HEB back in the early 2000s that put together the model MOU that's now been used by hundreds of universities. And so brought Ed in, and he really helped me to navigate that process with the regents and my foundation board. And because Jane Parker and I talk on a regular basis, and I've just got a great circle of people that are willing to help me learn from mistakes that they've made or just with gentle guidance. It's a good reminder of the importance of not just the donor relationships, but the peer relationships, the dean relationships that really are critical as we advance our work. I want to ask, as we conclude here, you've got a specific point of view on technology. It's been a common thread as we've had this conversation, but we did ask you if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the advancement sector, what would it be? And you had a very specific answer.
Yeah, everywhere I've been, we've had issues, I think, with technology at the foundation and the university communicating well with each other. And to try to wrap a bow around this, if there was a way that your foundation systems, your funds, your donor funds that you've raised this money and created, if it could talk in a seamless way with the foundation systems that they use to award that money and spend it, and then if you could capture what they used it for and the impact that it made, translate that back to your donors, we'd be able to be a lot more effective at what we do. We raise money, we put it in some fund, we make it available to the university, we hope they use it. Lots of times, if it's not scholarships, especially if it's unrestricted money, we may have no idea what they used it for and what impact it made. But that's the flavor of money that your university partners most want. They most covet that unrestricted money, but stewarding it is harder than any other flavor of money. And so, that's something that's been a bit of a passion for me. We've got a little kernel of a home-built software system here at NMSU that I think has some promise, to maybe for the first time with my peer group that I talk to, try to crack that particular problem. I know some universities have built their own kind of home-baked system, but there's not anything commercially that we've found that solves this problem. And so that, that's kind of got my entrepreneurial juices flowing a little bit. And I think it could be a big benefit for this industry if we could figure out how to do it and have all these various systems talking to each other and use the money for what you raised it for, and then communicate that benefit, that impact that it made back to the donor.
Seems simple. Seems like it should exist. I have no doubt we will discuss it again in the future, Derek. And I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your schedule. And on the spectrum of Zoom calls, I really enjoyed this one. And I know that our audience will enjoy getting a window into your world and your journey. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up today?
I appreciate the opportunity. I've enjoyed this podcast. I listen to it on a regular basis when I'm out jogging, and it's a great thing you're doing here. You've got a great company, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Derek. It's a great community. We're glad to be a part of it. And so with that, I will let Derek get back to the important work that he's doing at the New Mexico State University Foundation. And with that, Brent here signing off on the RAISE podcast. Take care, everybody.